throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howe. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howe looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina. The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
Oh, yeah. Welcome into another live edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast. And, oh, man. It feels like so long ago. Some of those highlights, believe it or not, were just last year. But it feels like so long ago since we've been able to talk about a win like that. And hopefully we are previewing a game that maybe finally gets Carolina another win that will have us feeling pretty good. Because it's been, well, since the first week of the season, really, since we've had that. And Carolina will be looking to do that on Saturday in Kenan Stadium as they take on the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. And for Carolina, look, ending a 3-game losing streak would be huge. Well, that would happen in two different ways if they were able to win this game on Saturday. Not only would it end the 3-game losing streak that Carolina is currently enduring here in the 2024 season, but it would also end a 3-game losing streak to a Georgia Tech program that has owned Carolina over the last 3 seasons. And all of those games, for the most part, Carolina has been heavily favored going into all of those. And so now Carolina, in a season where they're struggling, is presented with an extremely tough task against one of the more balanced teams in all of college football. This will be the 58th meeting all time with the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Georgia Tech with the advantage in the series, 33-21-3 in the 57 previous games that have been played. The Tar Heels have, as I mentioned, lost 3 straight in the series. The prior 2 years before last year, they were double-digit favorites, and they were a favorite on the road last year when they went to Atlanta, and they fell in a back-and-forth affair. And so this has been, for us, I mean, look, Carolina's always struggled with Georgia Tech, even going back to the days where we really started getting invested in this. But, man, this one, I think, would mean a lot for the program in general, especially with how things are going right now. They're just trying to limp into a bowl game. But it would mean a lot to finally get off the schneid again and beat Brent Key for the first time and really exact some revenge on a team that 2 of the seasons pretty much ended your year. And last year, you could argue, was also a big part of the recipe for why your season went south in this game. So, I mean, is that the hope that maybe you have in this game if you're a Carolina fan, that maybe this team has just had enough?
Yeah, I mean, you would have thought the last couple of years, though, that would have been the case. And that hadn't been the case. You've lost to an or a program that you're better than, more gifted than, more talented than, more deeper than the last 3 seasons. And that's just been the reality of the situation. The first loss, you basically kept Jeff Collins employed for the rest of that year. The second loss really was the beginning of Brent Key turning the Georgia Tech program around. And last year's loss was basically your inability to not have happened what happened the previous year, which was let one loss become 2 losses and derail your season. Luckily for Carolina, or unlucky, I guess, you're entering this game on a 3-game losing streak. Your season has already derailed, so losing this game wouldn't derail it from what could have been a special season. You probably need this game to really invoke confidence that you can be a bowl team. And you gotta start winning games at home. I mean, you lost to James Madison at home. You lost to Pittsburgh at home. And a third straight loss at home would probably be the beginning of this becoming a half-empty stadium down the stretch, and that's a hard reality for how far this program has come under Mac Brown in his second tenure, making sure Kenan Stadium had 52,000 plus in it every Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest with you. I don't know how many people are really going to be there for this one. I do hope that a lot of people do show up. This is Carolina's Cancer Awareness Day. Really, it's going to be paying tribute to a couple of guys that are battling cancer currently on the team. Tylee Kraft, who unfortunately, it does not look like he is going to be on the sidelines on Saturday. He is currently still at the UNC hospital going through, a tough battle with stage 4 cancer. And then you've got Cal Tierney, another guy who was diagnosed with cancer back during the offseason. And so this is a special day for Carolina. And, that's hopefully an area that Carolina can pull some inspiration from, is both of those guys and their fight that they have been going through. Maybe that's something that gets Carolina fired up and ready to play for this game. And I hope that certainly is the case. But that Georgia Tech is going to be fired up as well. This is a team that, look, they're 4-2. They're 2-2 in conference. And so I did not think, when I was going through, I really thought highly of this Georgia Tech team. I thought they were a team that would be able to compete in the ACC all the way down to the end. Right now, I don't think they're a team that's going to compete to make it to Charlotte. I think with the fact that they already have 2 conference losses, you look at how good Miami's playing on top of Clemson. I think those are, maybe too lofty of goals. But this is a team that I think still feels pretty good overall about where they are at. You look at them on the offensive side of the ball, 31.5 points per game, 434.5 yards of total offense per game, 257.8 passing yards, and 176.7 rushing yards. That's the number that should really scare you. And if you're looking for a game that shows you how good their running game is, all you got to do is go back to that season opener against Florida State, and it will be on display. Haynes King is a guy that I thought coming into the year, everybody was talking about Cam Ward, and rightfully so. That has panned out pretty well. But I thought Haynes King was a guy that was being disrespected a little bit in terms of where he was at, being talked about with some of the top quarterbacks in the ACC. This year, the thing is, last year, 37 touchdowns, 16 interceptions. So a guy that threw a lot of touchdowns, but was also the most turnover-prone quarterback in the country. This year, it's much, much different. He's under control, came into the game, I know, the other day with a 10-1 touchdown to interception ratio, and is a dual threat, is a guy that can really hurt you on the ground with his legs. That's something that Carolina is probably very fearful of. But I mean, I think he's a guy that, Carolina's going to be, aware of. They faced him now. They faced him a year ago with a defense that at that time was, beginning their struggles. This defense probably struggling a little bit more than that defense was, but hopefully having a year where they prepared for him, it should allow them to be at least a little bit more ready for what they're going to see from him in this matchup. The other guy to keep an eye on at the quarterback position is Zach Pyron. He is a guy that does come in short yardage situations down near the goal line, so Carolina will see him at certain points. Very obvious that when they bring him in, he's in for one reason and one reason only. He's their running quarterback that is built a little bit thicker and will use a lot of quarterback power to try to score touchdowns when they get down inside the 5-yard line. I have running back Jamal Haynes is the leading guy in that backfield. He's off to a sensational start to the year. Really, really thrived in that game out of the gate against Florida State. Since then, not nearly as effective, but still 366 yards, 5 touchdowns. But they've got a bunch of different guys in the backfield that can carry it, whether it's Chad Alexander, Trelane Maddox, Anthony Carey. There's a bunch of different guys that they are willing to hand the football off to. And so Carolina's got to be prepared for all of these different guys. That's one thing that hasn't really changed about Georgia Tech, even with the triple option going away, is they like to use a multitude of backs because there are guys that throw a different look at you and can keep you off balance. At wide receiver, it's really 2 guys that Carolina's got to be aware of, but they're having special starts of the season. Malik Rutherford, in 6 games, currently leads the team in receiving with 474 yards receiving, 37 receptions. So putting up even better numbers than what we saw from a guy like Nate McCullum when he put up some historic numbers at Georgia Tech a couple of years ago. Eric Singleton, also strong start for him, averaging 14.1 yards per reception so far this year on 27 receptions. So a big play threat that Carolina has to be aware of. And when you look at their offensive line, again, you go back to that game against Florida State, and that was the game I saw them in the most this year, probably like many of us. They simply just bullied that highly touted Florida State defensive line. Now, that defensive line, in hindsight, not that great, but Carolina's defensive line hasn't exactly been great throughout this entire season. And so this will be a challenge for Carolina. This offensive line, very strong, especially in pass protection. It helps when you have a mobile quarterback, but the thing is, they're not allowing a lot of pressure on them. So this is an offense that, look, they didn't put up the type of statistics in their first 6 games like what we saw from Pittsburgh in their first 4 when we were breaking them down last week. But I think you look at the opponents as well. This is a pretty impressive start for Georgia Tech. And this is an offense that we feared before the season when it came to this matchup, and we're fearing now as we head into this matchup.
Well, the thing about them is they just have so many different options and weapons. They get everybody involved. They're going to make you have to account for everybody that's on the football field. There's not a single person that is out there on accident. The bigger issue that you probably have to worry about if you're a Carolina fan is what does this defense do with all the pre-snap motion? Because they're going to move guys around. And they're going to have your eyes, in the backfield, and then that's when disaster strikes. And so Haynes King has done a fantastic job in his second year becoming a much more efficient quarterback. He's not just an explosive playmaker. He's now running the offense. Like last year, it was a bunch of boom and it was big play or turnover. And against us, he hit a lot of big plays. But in some of their other games, that if he wouldn't have turned the ball over, Georgia Tech would have probably won more games than they ended up winning last year.
Yep.
You've seen him cut down the turnovers, and yeah, they're 4-2, but they've already played. This will be their 5th ACC game already. But this is a team that realistically could still probably win eight games in the regular season because of the growth he's taken at the quarterback spot. So the numbers maybe aren't as explosive as Pittsburgh's, but they've played better competition to this point than Pittsburgh has. And we saw last year what this offense is capable of doing. And so for a Carolina defense that is just looking to stop the bleeding, this is not the best matchup to try to do so, because in comes a fun, creative, physical, dynamic offense that's capable of beating you on the ground with its running backs, on the ground with its quarterbacks, or through the air. Something we've seen this unit struggle with time and time again over the last 6 years.
You move to the defensive side of the ball, and this offseason they go out and get a new defensive coordinator, Tyler Santucci. And it was a guy that was highly regarded, and this group has looked much, much better so far early on in the season. 19.3 points per game, 312 yards of total offense allowed, 225 through the air, just 87.5 on the ground. Really starts with their interior defensive line. Jordan Vandenberg is tremendous. Thomas Gore, the transfer from Georgia State, has really found himself. And Zeke Biggers is a guy that's been there a while. And while he hasn't graded out great according to Pro Football Focus, he's still a guy that is a force in the middle of that defense. And that's part of the reason why their run defense is so successful. The other reason is their linebacking core. Kyle Efford, great player, wears the neck roll, everything like that. He is a guy that plays with his hair on fire. Sometimes it costs him. He gets out of position. He struggled a little bit, especially in coverage. But both him and Trinelius Tatum are guys that are really good in run defense. So Carolina, again, this running game is going to be challenged by what Georgia Tech is going to show them. Romello Height leads the charge on the edge for a group of solid edge rushers that haven't had quite the production that I think they probably feel like they should have. The secondary has given up some yards. That's been their one weakness when it's come to the games that they've lost, but they have made plays when they have needed to. The thing is, in their two losses, they have been exploited a little bit. They allowed 31 to Louisville in their most recent loss on the road. And then Syracuse, they allowed 31 in that game. The interesting thing is those are their only two true road games. That game against Florida State, of course, was neutral site over in Ireland. So this will be interesting. Their defense hasn't really traveled through road environments. I don't know if this road environment for Carolina is going to be nearly the challenge that the last two were, especially because it was early season Syracuse where the Dome is still feeling it, and Louisville, a place that is quietly one of the tougher environments in the ACC. But still, this is an area that maybe could provide a little bit of hope for Carolina going into this game.
Yeah, we all saw what James Madison did when they came into Kenan Stadium and moved the football up and down the field. I don't think this Georgia Tech defense is going to be, overwhelmed by the environment that they're going to be walking into on Saturday. What's interesting about their defense is this is the type of defense that we all thought they'd play under Jeff Collins. Like, they stop the run, they're physical, they really do a lot of great things. In a lot of areas that Jeff Collins was trying to establish when he was their head coach. Jeff Collins is now our defensive coordinator, and we're not playing nowhere near the defense that that Georgia Tech is. The neck roll from the linebacker is something that every football fan should appreciate. And the biggest thing is that this team knows how to stop the run. And now this is going to be their biggest task. This is the best running back they have faced so far this season.
Yep.
I don't know if Carolina can afford to become one-dimensional. We've seen what it's done to this offense the last couple of weeks when they've had to rely on Jacoby Criswell to throw it time and time again. So Carolina's going to have their work cut out for them in terms of being able to establish the run, because it's not the best front seven that they've played all year, but it's probably the second best. And they're gonna pose a challenge, and so it's gonna be interesting to see if Chip Lindsey can make the schematical changes to open up some more running lanes for Amarian Hampton, get some better protection for Jacoby Criswell, because if not, it could be a long day for this Carolina offense.
You move to special teams, and this is an area that might be a weakness for this Georgia Tech team. Aiden Burr off to a brutal start to the season. Just 4 of 8 on field goals so far this year. David Shanahan, solid punting numbers, averaging 44.3 yards per punt. And then at returner, they do have, a steady guy in Rodney Shelley that is their punt returner, but kick returner is a mess. They have, I think it's like 7 or 8 guys so far this year that have returned at least 2 kicks for them. So who knows who they're going to throw out there? There's 1 or 2 guys that have had some decent success. But that, still means that Carolina has to be prepared and ready for that. They've done a better job on special teams this year, but we've seen some lapses, especially with the team's punt coverage unit in terms of holding up in front of Tom McGinnis. You move to the Tar Heel storylines for this game. And I think the first thing that you have to talk about when it comes to this game, and we've been mentioning something along these lines really the last 2 weeks, and now we're going to ask it again this week. Now, I think for this game, it's a little bit different. And the question is, how motivated is this team? Because you could say, well, considering what we've seen the last 2 weeks, there's probably no motivation for this team. They probably know that at the end of the season, Mac Brown will probably be done. And I think at this point, we've all kind of become resigned to that being the likely outcome. But I do think that when you look at all of the things that are going to surround this game, what this team has done to Carolina the last 3 years, there are guys that have been on those teams that are probably motivated to step up and give at least some sort of response. Look, Georgia Tech's not in the same spot that you were each of the last 2 years when they've sort of upset the apple cart and really turned your season in the wrong direction. But they're a team that's feeling pretty good about themselves. And if you were to hand them their 3rd conference loss, I mean, that could be pretty damning for their chances. What they probably still feel like is to compete in the ACC. And so I feel like that's an area that, maybe Carolina pulls some motivation from. The other area, of course, is what I mentioned earlier, that this is Cancer Awareness Day, that one of their teammates in Tylee Kraft, a guy who has been around the team for years and has been dealing with this, that has been at practice and fighting through all this, is currently dealing with one of the toughest battles that he has faced yet while dealing with his stage 4 cancer. And Cal Tierney, another teammate, who's dealing with that as well. Maybe that allows them to dig deep and pull some sort of motivation out for this game. I mean, that to me, that's the biggest thing that you got to see, because if this team isn't motivated for this game, then there's a chance that they could get steamrolled.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to think that they'd show up and play with some pride. That's not what this program has been under Mac Brown when the going has gotten tough. And a lot of it is his fault. Like the messaging coming out of his press conference on Monday, you would have maybe liked to hear him talk about, God knows I'm tired of losing to the same, to this team 3 straight years. Instead we got told we can win every game and we can lose every game. There's no denying that with this being the Cancer Awareness game and the battles that Tierney and Kraft are going through, that should serve as motivation. To at least, I mean, even if you lose, just play hard. I mean, because you're fighting to win a game. You got some guys that are fighting to live another day. And that should be an inspirational thing. But I mean, that only carries you. It only carries you so far. And so, I think unfortunately, because of what happened against James Madison, and then the last 2 weeks where Carolina has had opportunities in the second half to win games and they haven't done so, I think it's hard to expect this team to come out motivated. And so, that opens up the door for maybe Carolina to get steamrolled. I don't think Georgia Tech is that good to come in there and blow them out. I don't think Carolina is that bad to get blown out.
Yep.
But we've seen this team before, be flat. And I think, they weren't flat last week in the first half. They weren't flat last week or 2 weeks ago against Duke. But after 3 straight losses and the way they've lost these games, you should not be surprised if this team comes out Saturday without a pulse.
Yeah, plus it's a 12 o'clock game, and we know how that works for this program. It has not worked out well. So hopefully there is some sort of response early in this game. Just show at least some signs of life. That's all we really want to see. One of the big things in this matchup is what will the Tar Heel run game be able to do against Georgia Tech's defense? And in this game, Carolina's run game has to be able to succeed. And we're not just talking about the first half. Now, that'll be more of a challenge than probably any other game that you've played so far this year. I think that's certainly on the table. You look at how successful Georgia Tech has been over those first 6 games, stopping the run. This is probably the best run defense that you've played so far. I know Duke, very aggressive front 7, a lot of tackles for loss, but their run defense was still giving up yards. This is the best, most consistent run defense that you have faced so far. And so now a group that has run the ball very well in the first half of the last 2 games, but has been shut down in the last 2 second halves. They've got to figure out how to make this consistent across this entire game, because if not, then Carolina's offense could certainly be in trouble.
Yeah, if Amarian Hampton can't get the yardage he's used to getting, you're going to see the same results you've seen the last couple weeks, which is a heavy dose of blitzing, and this offensive line just isn't equipped to handle that, and your quarterback isn't equipped to handle that. The most important thing is Chip Lindsey has to stay more committed to the run game if the game is close. Like last week, the game was never at a point in the second half where you ran the ball 12 times. You lost by 10, and it was a one-possession game for the majority of the second half. 12 rushes just isn't enough. And so can Chip Lindsey be stubborn about running the football, even though there's not going to be the big runs that you're used to seeing, even with as good as Amarian is? And so if he does that, and I think it could help Carolina maybe wear down their front, just get Jacoby Criswell's just some confidence in himself and be able to hold up a little bit longer in pass protection. If not, I think you're just going to see more of the same, which is Carolina's offense inability to sustain drives, not score points, and ultimately lose the ball game. So the good news is you've got right now the best or the second best back in the country. You need to give him the football 25 to 30 times to give your offense a chance.
Yeah, and the thing is in order to supplement some of those other carries that you're looking for from Chip Lindsey in this game, trying to be more aggressive in the second half. I mean, that's the thing. If you got to use a guy like Davian Gauss, use him. Hopefully you do finally have back Darwin Barlow. He's still working his way back from the injury. If he's back, then great. That's another guy that kind of gives you a little bit of a different type of back in that backfield that maybe can hit a little more of those off-tackle home runs, stuff like that. So, I mean, that's kind of what I think you're hoping for if you're Carolina, because running the football is going to lead to the most success, because it prevents these teams from being able to just pin their ears back and blitz the hell out of your quarterback, which we have seen each of the last 2 weeks, and even going back to that game against James Madison when they got to the second half and needed to get a couple of stops to make sure that they didn't allow Carolina to get back into the game. The next thing is, it's pretty simple when it comes to this defense. How can they possibly slow down this Georgia Tech offense? I think, honestly, it really goes back to what we talked about last week against another really good offense, one of the best in the country in Pittsburgh. This offense doesn't rank in those same categories, but with a mobile quarterback, it's going to be extremely tough for Carolina to contain their running game, because we've seen Carolina struggles when they face these mobile quarterbacks. It doesn't matter what year it is, what defensive coordinator is coordinating this defense. They have never been able to solve that problem, especially, let alone the defensive issues, period. The thing is that it comes down to me to communication, making sure that you don't blow the amount of assignments that you did last week, that guys are in the right gaps, especially when you're going up against this rushing offense that tore you apart down the stretch in that game last season. And then I think it comes for the secondary. It goes back to the turnovers that we talked about last week. You've got to be able to bring out the old Haynes King in this game. If you're not the team that's able to turn them over, I find it hard to believe that this offense isn't going to have a ton of success against this defense that right now, it's just as fragile as they come. When one thing goes wrong, this defense falls apart. And Georgia Tech, they're going to be a lot of really successful things they're going to be able to do in this game. And I don't know how this defense will handle it.
Yeah, it simply comes down to A, you got to pray, and B, you got to get pressure on Haynes King to force him into the guy that makes mistakes, commits turnovers, and really derails the ball game for Georgia Tech and their offense. So, look, I think Jeff Collins has simplified this defense as much as he can, like every coordinator has had to in Mac Brown's second tenure, to the point where you're using one word to set your defense. Like, it's not that complicated, and yet we're still screwing it up. But it really comes down to, can Javari Ritzie, Kamen Rucker, if he's on the field, Des Evans, can they get back to applying the pressure on the quarterback we saw the first couple of weeks? If not, Haynes King is going to pick you apart, and then they'll be able to run the football at you. And your defense will just be left, grasping for air as defenders run by them. So, I hate to be that simple about it, but that's what it is. Like, Carolina's not good enough defensively to hold if they don't rush the passer. Just not.
Well, they're here's the thing. You could just say it right out. This defense is not good, and they will never be good this year. Like, look, the only hope that you have is that this group somehow gets inspired by the return of Kamen Rucker to a full-time role. I don't know if he's even going to be able to be in a full-time role in this game. Last week, he played 9 snaps. So, what's the reason to believe that he's going to be a full go? I think having him for maybe 25, 30 snaps in this game would be huge. But, is he really going to make that much of a difference? Yeah, maybe he is a guy that just completely unlocks the pass rush. We saw him do it at times last year. But, is this secondary going to be able to hold up? How much can he really help you in the run game? I thought he looked better in the run game when we saw him at full strength in the lone game that he was this year against Minnesota. But, I don't know. Maybe I'm the guy, and people may think even that's too optimistic. But I can't see one dude making that big of a difference for a defense that just seems to have zero confidence.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like, Kamen Rucker is he's a really good football player. He's not that level of a game changer, and that's okay. But it's just where Carolina is, and it's frustrating that we're back at this position again, where you don't really feel hopeful going into the game that going into any game that our defense can play with a pulse. I really thought after the Minnesota game they would that was not that version was going to be who they were going to be every week, but that we could hold teams to 24 points a game week in, week out. And the first 3 weeks they did that, and then James Madison happened, and then it's been all hell breaking loose ever since. So respect Kamen Rucker for still wanting to suit up and play, because in this era you could see guys sit out the rest of the year, start getting ready for the draft, and who could blame him? But he wants to be out there competing with his guys. But with that said, this isn't a guy that changes the game that dramatically to make you believe this Tar Heel defense is going to do its job to the fullest extent on Saturday.
The last storyline, I think, for the Tar Heels is, look, this is a chance for a little bit of revenge. And it's also the chance to kind of shift the script a little bit. And, look, the pursuit of getting back to a bowl game, I think, is kind of where we're at right now. Mac Brown has talked about it. I think it was not this week's press conference. I believe it was the one before Pittsburgh, where he talked about how Carolina has been a team that has historically under him started the season fast and then faded down the stretch. It has especially been true in the last 2 seasons. The thing that you're hoping happens, and maybe we're putting this all on me, because when I was there in the preseason, I was begging, please, if anything is going to happen, start out slow and then find a way to finish the season strong, because at least then you have positive vibes going into the offseason. At this point, it's not even that. It's find a way to make a bowl game and just have this end on a positive note. Because, again, I think this is it for Mack Brown. I think the answers that we're seeing in press conferences, I think just the way you can look at him on the sideline, I think it's really starting to hit home with him that the game is passing him by a little bit. He's maybe not connecting with guys on game day the way that he needs to. He's doing it on the recruiting trail, but when it comes to game day, it just doesn't seem to be translating. And so I think this is really your chance to turn around. You could say, well, maybe after the bye week. After the bye week, you got to go on the road to a team in Virginia who is 4-1. And I mean, look, we're talking about shockers in the ACC. Nobody's talking about Virginia. That might be the most shocking record of anybody in this conference. The way that they looked last weekend, beating Boston College, was incredibly impressive. So that's not an easy game. After that, you then have to go on the road to Florida State, which I don't care what Florida State looks like. You have been historically terrible there, and there's a good chance that if you get into a close game with them, they're going to find a way to win because Mack Brown just can't seem to beat that team. Then you get Wake Forest, which might be, a game that you look at as winnable. Boston College on the road, don't think that's going to happen. And we come back to that state game. The thing is, you could win Wake and NC State, but then that means you have to win one on the road. You talked about it. Take care of the games at home, and maybe you have a chance to make it to a bowl game. I feel like that's kind of that's how important this game is if you're going to turn this around and send Mack Brown out on at least some sort of positive note.
Yeah, you would like to think that Jeff Collins, and maybe behind the scenes, Jeff Collins is pissed off at what happened at Georgia Tech.
Yep.
Seemed pretty at peace at it when he met with the media on Monday. And maybe that's just him being respectful, doing the whole coach speak thing. But you've seen in certain instances where a coach is coaching against his former school, he's okay with letting it be known publicly this is personal. And then your team plays like that way. It doesn't feel like Jeff Collins is taking this game all too personal. So, are the players that have lost to this team 3 straight years, are they going to take it personal? I don't know. You gotta hope that they look at Saturday and know internally if we want to at least compete for a bowl game, we got to win. And if we want to make Mack Brown at least go out with some sort of dignity, we have to win this game. Because right now, you're the reason why he wanted to quit 3 weeks ago. Like, that's the reality of the situation.
That's how this team will be remembered. Yep.
This is the team that broke him. Because up until until that happened 3 weeks ago, you never heard that type of messaging from Mack Brown. You heard frustrated Mack Brown, why they couldn't get over the hump, why they faded down the stretch. And he's been very open and honest and candid about that. But it was never, I think I'm the problem. We never got there. And this is the team that has pushed him to his near breaking point. You can almost reverse course if you find a way to come out and win on Saturday afternoon. So it'll be interesting to see if they come out and play pissed off. But we thought that was going to happen last year. That didn't happen. We thought it was going to happen 2 years ago. That didn't happen. It's hard to believe that we think it'll happen on Saturday.
All right, we move to the keys to the game. And the first one is pretty simple because you look at where Georgia Tech has been most successful this year. We talked about the success of that offensive line, what leads them to the success in the run game. You've got to be able to match that up front for Carolina. And the thing is that you go back to that Duke first half. Carolina did a really good job of controlling the run game. You look at last week, outside of the quarterback Eli Holstein, and a lot of his yards came in the second half, Carolina, once again, does a pretty good job of winning at the line of scrimmage. The other side, I think, is probably even more important. Man, Carolina's offensive line, it just simply hasn't been good enough. And I don't think any of us are really that shocked. There were so many new pieces that came in the offseason. Getting a few guys injured that were out of the lineup sort of ruined the chemistry that group had early in the year. But this group just has not been good enough the last 2 weeks when they've needed to be down the stretch of games to move these defensive linemen, out of the way from Duke and Pittsburgh. The thing is that Duke, it was understandable. That's a defensive front that even with all the losses that they suffered this past offseason, they rebuilt and they were a pretty strong group. That Pittsburgh group was nowhere near the unit that they were on the interior of that defensive line the last few years, and they still dominated you when it mattered the most. You've got to be able to match the physicality, the intensity on the other side of the football, because if you're able to run the ball successfully in the second half, whether it's with Hampton, maybe you're using a little more of Jacoby Criswell, which I think we both said we want to see more of from Chip Lindsey. If you are able to run the ball in the second half, it takes so much pressure off of your quarterback. And more importantly, it will allow you to win on first and second down and avoid these third and long situations that have really set your offense back over the last few weeks.
Yeah, the most concerning thing for this is that, and there's no denying that Florida State's been overrated. You go back to that first game, Georgia Tech's offensive line completely manhandled Florida State's defensive front. They were blowing them off the ball. And then on the flip side, they were living in DJU's pocket. Like they were living in the backfield. And Florida State's not a good team. They've got better talent than Carolina has. And we saw Georgia Tech just flat out whip them up front. For me, it's hard to be upset at with this offensive line where it's at, just because we wanted to see new guys, and we're getting that, and we should have expected sort of uneven play. For me, if Carolina runs the ball, it's going to be because they're stubborn, and they're going to run it 30, 35 times, and by the middle of the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter, those 2-3 yard runs become 6, 8, 10, 12 yard runs, and you just wear them down. You've got a physical back in Omarion Hampton. You've got a guy like Davian Goss that can spell him as well and kind of runs with the same kind of thump. And then if you use your quarterback's legs, now you have three guys they have to account for. And so, I think on the offensive side, it's going to take a total team effort. Use your tight ends in the blocking scheme as well, just to really put more bodies on their defensive line. On the flip side, I think it really just comes down to does Carolina show up? Like, is the Jahvaree Ritzie we saw the first week or the first 3 weeks of the year, is that guy still there? Or has that guy checked out? Kamen Rucker's going to play hard because these are his last snaps every time he walks on the field as a Tar Heel. Des Evans is no longer making the play that makes the play happen. Can he get back and play with a sense of urgency? And then can Travis Shaw, can some of these other guys just impact the game? Because the last 3 weeks they've just been bystanders getting blocked into the dirt. And so for me it's a pride thing. Can you play with a sense of urgency? Because if not, man, this Georgia Tech team would love nothing more than to run the ball at you and run it down your throats and kick your ass. So we talk about this almost every week. Whichever team wins up front is going to win the game. There's nothing there's evident in this one. And if Carolina doesn't hold up in the trenches, it really makes it hard to see them winning the game.
Yeah, and look, man, I'll tell you, when it comes to some of the interior defensive linemen, I mean, I think Kevin Hester, that early season success that he had against the run, has dropped off just a little bit. Man, Travis Shaw is a dude that I think's been playing hard the whole season. He's out there making plays. He's in the backfield. But when you're the lone guy on the defensive line that seems to be consistently doing that in the run game, it's not really going to help you. So, yeah, it's going to take a total group effort up front, and you got to be able to contain the edges better. It's that simple. And that kind of leads into the next key to the game, which I think is pressure Haynes King. I want to focus on that a little more specifically, because if you're able to do that, we said this is a guy that has proven to you in the past that he will turn the football over if you can get pressure on him. But you've got to be smart about how you're getting that pressure. We've seen it. Look, I thought the other day, one of the things that you constantly saw over and over again was a guy like Des Evans just running straight down the line at the quarterback. The thing is, dude, if that tackle pushes you outside, all of a sudden there's a lane for him to escape. You've got to be able to contain the quarterback a little bit more while getting some of that direct pressure. Look, I know it's putting a lot of responsibility on these edge rushers. That's why I really hope that Kamen Rucker can be back, because he's used to being a guy that has to put pressure on the quarterback while not getting help from blitzes. That's where this defense is at right now. They can't blitz because this secondary is not good enough for them to be able to blitz. So it's up to the guys on the edges to be able to get that pressure. And yeah, Jahvaree Ritzie, you started the season so hot. Can we get a pulse? Is there anything? Can you dig down deep and find what you had early in the season to be able to fight through some of these guys and get to the quarterback? Because if you get that pressure on Haynes King, there's a chance that it can lead to the things that this defense needs the most right now, which is turnovers, since they can't seem to stop teams from moving the ball consistently on them.
Quite frankly, that's the only way Carolina competes in this game defensively. If they don't force turnovers, Georgia Tech's going to move the ball and they're going to score probably on every meaningful possession of the ball game. We haven't seen Haynes King turn it over this year because you haven't seen him be pressured and put in the position to make the mistakes that he made last year. I'd like to see Carolina be as aggressive as they can be up front with some stunts. Just try to cause some sort of confusion. Be more disciplined with your gap integrity, and really try to make him have to throw from a muddy pocket. Because the thing is, you got to worry about his legs. His mobility and his ability to extend plays with his legs is a big part of what makes their passing game so hard to defend. And so this is going to take the kind of just disciplined effort you saw from Carolina in week one. Not the same quarterback, not the same explosive type of quarterback that you saw against Minnesota. This guy's much better. But Carolina's front four was like, they were just sound. Like they did their job, they played their gaps, they did what they were asked to do, and it gave their back end a chance. And that's at this point, that's you just got to give these guys a chance. Like as bad as they've been, and we've ripped Marcus Allen and Caleb Koss and all these other guys, they also haven't been given much of an opportunity to make plays because there's been no pass rush the last 3 weeks, and you can only guard someone for so long. So I think that Haynes King is still in there where if he gets pressured, if he gets rattled, he will make a couple bad throws, and you got to capitalize on that. But it comes down to starting with the front four getting a pass rush, because as you mentioned, I don't think Jeff Collins has the confidence to blitz right now with just the way this secondary has played the last 3 weeks.
Well, and my third key to the game, it's probably because I don't really believe that much in this team being able to pressure Haynes King and being able to force turnovers and limit the amount of points put up on the board. So when you get to the red zone, it's real simple. You got to score touchdowns. Now, here's the thing. When I say this, it's almost a twofold, maybe even a fourth key to the game per se. That doesn't mean that if it's 4th and 3 inside of your own 10, that you have to automatically go for it. But when this team is there, don't even get to that point. You've got to be able to put the ball in the end zone. They weren't able to do it last week against a high-scoring offense in Pitt. And look, your defense did enough to hold them to 34 points. I know that ain't something you should be celebrating, but still, that was an offense that came in averaging 48.5 per game. This is an offense that's going to be able to score. We know it. This defense right now is just not good enough. So it's up to this offense to be able to put the ball in the end zone when they get inside the red zone. If they do that, they have a chance in this game because once again, like a lot of the games that we have seen since Mac Brown has returned and really ever since Larry Fedora stepped foot on campus, the team that has the ball last, if it's a close game, is going to be able to win. This is going to be another shootout if Carolina is going to find a way to win. And in order to do that, you got to be able to put 6 on the board.
Yeah, your offense scored 17 points last week because you had a pick 6.
Yep.
17's not enough. This week, it's not enough probably moving forward. I think if you can get to 28, you have a shot. Because Georgia Tech is 30, 31 points per game.
Yep.
And look, I was critical of Mac Brown's decisions to go for it at certain times where, if you kick the field goal, I think the game gets played out differently. But he understands that field goals now are going to get him beat. First couple of weeks, you could kick field goals in the red zone because your defense wasn't what it has morphed into once again. This is a game where if you settle for 3s and you're giving up 6s, well, we know how that math is going to work out. So, I think Carolina can move the ball because they haven't had an issue moving the ball. They moved the ball up and down the field last week against Pittsburgh, but it's when the field condenses. Can they run the ball good enough inside the 20-yard line, and then can Jacoby Criswell just make 2 to 3 throws that he's going to have to make to win the game? Carolina's asking in the last couple weeks to make 6 to 8 throws. That's too many. But if you can run the ball and ask him to make 2 to 3 big throws, whether it's in the red zone or off a deep play action pass like you had with J.J. Jones last week, then these results may have been different at Duke and against Pittsburgh. So, but you're right. I mean, this cannot be a game where Carolina lives in the 20, but they're coming away with 3s. You got to score, I think, at least 4 touchdowns to give yourself a chance on Saturday.
All right, Mr. Positive, we're going to lead off with you when it comes to the predictions. What do you see happening in this game on Saturday?
Yeah, I would love to think Carolina wins. I'd like to think that, they would come out inspired, play for Tylee Craft, play for Tierney, and try to get this thing back on the right track. I just don't like the body language coming out of this program. Really disappointed in what I saw from Mac Brown in his presser on Monday. I think that body language is permeating throughout the program, and it's why the culture is what the culture is. I think Carolina competes, but I think they ultimately lose their 4th straight game. Give me Georgia Tech 31-21 on Saturday in Kenan Stadium.
Oh, man. Yeah, I don't – look, man, I'm the uber positive guy out of the two of us on this podcast. I mean, hell, last week I picked them to win. I said I'm believing in you one last time, and I was being truthful. This is a game that I thought coming into the year they were not going to win. And that's when I thought this team could win 9 games. I look like an idiot now, although not as big of an idiot as you do. You thought they could win 10. I mean, look, competing I don't think is going to be a problem. That's why when people tried to say, and we talked about it in the recap podcast for the Pittsburgh game, when people tried to say after the game on Saturday, this looks a lot like Larry Fedora towards the end. No, it does not. It does not look anything like 17 or 18. This team is going to be competitive. They're going to give you hope in game that there is a chance that if you do 1 or 2 things right in certain areas, you're going to find a way to win this game. But ultimately, this team is not good enough to be able to win these types of games. This offense for Georgia Tech is too good. And this offense for Carolina, I don't think is good enough. That's the biggest thing. I think that's what you're looking at for a lot of these matchups moving forward is can Carolina's offense match the offense that's on the other side? Because there is no way in hell that this defense is going to be able to stop any of these offenses that you have coming up down the stretch of the season. A lot of these offenses which are playing very, very well. So I think this is another game that's similar to last week. Maybe the defense creates a turnover or two, but ultimately I just don't know if this offense is going to be able to finish in the red zone. And I find it hard to believe until they show it to me that they're going to be able to run the football in the second half. And if you can't do that and you're stuck in these third and longs, it's going to look a lot like what we've seen. The crazy part is that I've got Georgia Tech 31-21 over Carolina. So, hopefully it ends up working out a little bit different. I really do hope that they can dig deep and use the inspiration of the fights that we're seeing from Tylee Kraft and Cal Tierney and allow that to spur them to a victory. It would be amazing because I don't give a rat's ass about this team right now when it comes to this game. This is a win that Tylee Kraft deserves and that Cal Tierney deserves. So dig deep and find a way to win this game. I don't care if no one believes in you. I don't believe in you. But find a way to get it done. Regardless of what happens, we'll have you covered on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We'll have the recap up there. I promised you guys a stock report this week. I'm going to tell you, at this point, I just don't think that we're going to be able to do those probably the rest of the season. There's just too much other news that's coming out on top of the jobs that we currently work. So, I think that's something that we're going to scrap for right now. But I do think that, all the other stuff that we have you covered on, the injuries, whenever those come out each week, any of the other big storylines around the team in terms of team news. And then, of course, we had an article that I put out today. That is a huge one. Carolina is in danger of losing one of their top commits in the 2025 class. And this is pretty serious. This is one of the guys that Carolina has had committed for a while. A guy that even before he committed was trending to Carolina and was trying to recruit other guys to commit with him wherever he ultimately committed, which everybody kind of knew was going to be Carolina. This would be a pretty severe loss, and I do wonder if it could start sort of a chain reaction in this class. So go over, read who it is, read the impact that losing him could have for Carolina on their 2025 recruiting class. And then, in terms of any other coverage moving forward, we're going to have you covered. We'll go into the bye week. That's when we will do our midseason grades. I know a lot of you guys are probably wondering, hey, we're 6 games in already. Where are the midseason grades? Well, it's not perfect, but it is sort of the midway point, hopefully the midway point if we're considering that the team plays 13 games and finds a way to make a bowl game. It would basically serve as that. So next week, we'll do those midseason grades for you. We'll also have the midseason edition of the podcast as well for you guys. So don't worry, all that stuff is on the horizon for you. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things, it was ACC tip-off today. Josh recorded an edition of the podcast, the Four Corners podcast, earlier this afternoon, sort of detailing all of the stuff that was said at Media Days for the Tar Heels. So make sure you go back, check that out. And then this is a big weekend, man. You've got the blue-white scrimmage for Carolina. Then after that, they will head to Memphis on Tuesday. They'll play that scrimmage on Tuesday night. That'll be for a good cause. So everybody can definitely get behind that. And same thing with the blue-white scrimmage, all donations for Hurricane Helene relief. So, charitable week for Carolina basketball, but also a week that's going to show us a lot about this 24-25 team for the Tar Heels. So make sure that you check out the website. We'll have you covered all throughout this weekend when it comes to Carolina basketball and into early next week. And then, believe it or not that far off from the start of Carolina basketball. So we will officially be in preseason mode, getting you guys ready for what should be another exciting year of Tar Heel basketball, where the Tar Heels try to get back to the Final Four. And as RJ Davis said, get that national championship that he is seeking after not being able to get it back in 22-23. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.